Hello, friends. Welcome back to the School of Self-Worth. I'm your host, Nicole Song, and I just love the conversation with our guest today so much. Judy Tsuei and I met through a community of powerful Asian American women, and her journey from her 20s, when she had and her experience in her life to own her self-worth, going from having an eating disorder to now being a mom and a writer and an entrepreneur. It just really resonated with me so deeply. And I know so many pieces of her story also will touch you as well. She is the founder of Wild Hearted Words, a powerful strategic branding and content marketing agency. And she's the author of the Little Book of Tibetan Rites and Rituals. And then this one is so fun. She's also the host of the Fox Saving Face podcast, empowering mental and emotional health for Asian Americans by breaking through taboo topics and driving real conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion using the power of storytelling. You do not want to miss out on this conversation. I loved it so much. And if you're an ambitious Asian American woman who wants to master her mind and emotions so she can manifest a promotion in 60 days and live the life of her dreams, DM me dreams on Instagram. I have got something for you. All right, friends, let's dive into this conversation with Judy. Well, Judy, welcome to the School of Self-Worth. I'm so excited to have you join us.
I'm so excited that you do a whole podcast about self-worth. I think that especially for Asian Americans and any child of immigrants, I feel like this is a very almost like new and nuanced subject to explore even well into adulthood.
For sure. I mean, I feel that it is always, again, like this journey that you're on. And sometimes we get into this place where we think, well, like, I'll just somehow have it at the end of the rainbow and it'll be done. And I'm like, well, it just never really works that way, which is why I think it's so awesome to have women like you come on and we can be in the continuing conversation of that. So I
Yeah.
know it's always a big topic when I ask this question, but I'd love to hear from you, Judy. Like, where did you start to have the awareness? I always feel like it starts with the awareness I don't have self worth. Like,
Mhm.
where do you feel like that began for you? And then we can kind of start our conversation from there.
You know what's interesting is while I say that I know like my human self has definitely struggled with elements of self-worth because I grew up the eldest of four children in a tiger parented home. And you know, not only did did they do the traditional like authoritarian parenting things of like you need to get A pluses and why aren't you as good as this other person, but I think in addition to that I realized that my parents very much were unequipped, ill equipped to be parents. I think that they are better with adults and adult children, but they were ill equipped to handle us, and they had four of us. And so, me being the eldest, also, I was not the typical, you know, submissive, docile, quiet. I was naturally louder. I laughed loud. I like walked loud. I just was a kid and wanted to take up space. And so my mom actively, and my parents and my extended family relatives, they would say this as well, but they would tell me that I was super selfish. They would tell me that they regret that I was ever born, that they don't know why they had me, and that who cares about what I'm doing and how worthless I was. So I was getting those messages from a very early age. And even though I was getting those messages when I was very young, I remember having the sense of knowing that all of this stuff was happening for a reason and that it would play a positive role in my life later on, that I would be able to make something out of it and help someone. And I can't explain how I knew that. It wasn't like a survival mechanism. Like my eating disorder was a survival mechanism. This was a deep, deep knowing. And then from there, I think that as I developed an eating disorder and then ran all the way to the other side of the world and tried to run away from myself and found out, oh, there I am still. Shoot. I came all the way back. And when I was dealing with it, I found journals of when I was very young. So my mom wanted us to keep journals to practice our English. And so from 7 years old on, I would say, up until I was in high school or even probably like college, I was finding the same entries over and over of I need to be better. Why does everybody hate me? You know, like I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. And so when I saw that in my 20s, as I was going through therapy and finally dealing with all of these things, it really was like right there in black and white. Oh my gosh, I have a self worth issue. Like, I really need to work on this. And I've had it for a very long time.
Mm. Thank you for sharing all of those pieces.
Mm.
And I'd love to kind of go through that journey a little
Yeah.
bit. And especially that part where you're saying, I feel like it's a journey for Asian American culture in particular. And I'm curious, there's so many shades to this, right? There's no like one absolute, obviously, experience with it. But if you feel like, especially in the way that you grew up and the way that your parents kind of taught you and did things, if self-worth had to do more with like them being happy than with you being happy, because there can be that, especially the collective, I think group harmony
Hmm.
experience can be a big suppression,
Hmm.
especially as a kid, I feel like, of self-worth. And I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that I was definitely a truth teller growing up. And so nobody wanted to hear the truth of how dysfunctional our family was and our extended family. And so it was definitely an opportunity to quash that and not have to deal with it. And to my father's credit, especially, he's grown so much and he's like in his mid to late 70s now. And just watching his emotional self develop even now has been such an inspiring journey to see, like, it's never too late. You can always and will hopefully always continue to learn and grow. And so he's okay with discomfort now. He's okay with having to reflect upon those things now, but not everybody's going to go through that. And so I think it was very performative. It was very how do we keep the peace? It was very much they were so involved in their own trauma of their marriage and their stress about financial worries that there was no room for us to have any additional stressor on their lives.
So you guys were just there to like, you were there, and then whatever you could do to like not be a problem
It
is
was
what it sounds like.
definitely, yeah, I was a
Yeah.
parentified child. I packed my siblings' lunches. I,
Mm.
did all the school things, translated for my grandmother, like all of the things. And so I often see my daughter now, my daughter is 9, and wonder, oh my gosh, like, is that what a childhood is like? Because that's phenomenal. And also to allow her to express openly and have those emotions is both beautiful and freeing, and so um triggering is not the right word, but just definitely like a difficult place to be sometimes, because it reminds me, like, oh my gosh, I wasn't able to do that when I was young. Is someone going to think something of this feeling that she's having, and that, like, I'm not reining her in and immediately being like, be quiet. So it's a constant growth.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. I definitely feel that for sure with you. I'm with you on that. Well,
Mhm.
I'm curious then too, you spoke about how, where do you feel like then the connection between self-worth and your eating disorder came in? Like, were they connected too?
Absolutely. I think that it's interesting because my sister also developed an eating disorder. It was never anything that we talked about. And in the beginning, it was anorexia. So it was very prominent and noticeable. I used to go to Chinese school every Saturday, and in the, our culture, nobody's really talking about feelings or whatever. But I was getting to a point where I was very much counting every single calorie and, doing everything I could to expend calories. So my Chinese school was at my junior high, which was maybe like a mile and a half down the road. And so instead of going to school with my mom and my siblings, because my mom was a Chinese school teacher, I'm like, I'm going to run to school. And so I ran to school, and my Chinese teacher pulled me aside and was just like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you've lost so much weight. Are you okay? And of course, I brushed it off, but it was shocking to me that this woman, would actually take the initiative to say this, because she also was another teacher who my mom knew, and my parents weren't saying anything about this. So in the beginning, it was very much about control, trying to control the chaos. And then when I ran all the way to the other side of the world, I was very heavily into bulimia. And I always say that bulimia is a very, like, angry expression. It's a very violent, like, you're binging and you're purging and just doing this very violent act on your body, but trying to, like, just handle all of these feelings that are so difficult. And so when I was in China and I came back and I started dealing with it in this intensive outpatient program, I just started seeing how many of the other people, it was predominantly always women. It was pretty much always, I was the only Asian person in the room. I would say the majority, like 3/4, 9/10, had all experienced some sexual trauma in some way. And everyone was the kindest, smartest, most sensitive, creative, wonderful human who just could not grapple with the way that life had been handed to them. And sometimes it was very severe things that had happened, or just hadn't been taught healthier coping mechanisms for, understanding like I can take care of myself in better ways, and there are better ways to do this. So it was very much a difficult, it was just so sad. I feel like the most, anyone who I've ever known who's had an eating disorder has always just been so intelligent and caring and kind and sensitive. And I think the world doesn't value sensitivity or acknowledge that there's different ways of being in the world. And so I think everybody just finds a way to cope in the end.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing this here and sharing so openly about it, because I do
Yeah.
think that talking about it, right, makes such a difference. And
Yeah.
one thing you've been saying sort of repeatedly that is how about feelings and like suppression of feelings. And where would you say then for yourself, like learning to feel? Because I'd say this, I'm also Taiwanese Chinese culture background,
Mm,
right? That like
mm,
it's not talked about. Like we just don't even talk about having
mm,
feelings. It's not like it's just not even an acknowledgement. Like
mhm,
you have feelings or
mhm,
don't have feelings. And like
mm.
my mom would often have like expressions of anger, but she wouldn't like talk about being angry. She would just be
Yes.
like yell.
Yes.
And then right, and then my dad was like nothing. Like there was
Yes.
no no emotional things were happening at all on his side. And so then, as a kid, I was just, and I was like the opposite of you. I was like the quiet kid, and my sister was older and was like the loud one. And I just was like, oh, like I think I cried a lot. And I remember they used to tell
Yeah.
me I was really sensitive, I think because I
Mm.
cried a lot. And I was like, well, I wasn't sensitive. I was just a kid, like when you're
Mhm.
a kid, you cry.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so if you could talk a little bit more about how for yourself, like feeling emotions played into it, like and I even think of it this way. It's like you have to have self-worth almost to have emotions. Like when you're a kid, you don't, because you have self-worth as a kid. You're just like,
Mhm.
I'm here. But when
Mhm.
you're older, like, could you talk about that interplay a little bit for yourself?
Yeah, it was fascinating when I was in my intensive outpatient program that the therapist was like, okay, so what do you feel? I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And she was like, here's a feelings list. And, under each column of the main, like sad, angry, like whatever, there were all these synonyms. And I was like, wait, what? You can feel all of these feelings underneath like each emotion? Um, I think it was I think not being able to have a voice when you're growing up makes it really hard to advocate for your own self worth
Mm.
and to even understand that that's a possibility. My daughter, I remember listening to NPR when she was born and hearing the story that if a child isn't given the appropriate name for their private parts of their body, then they can't ever own it. And if they can't own it, they can't defend it and they can't protect themselves. And so from a very early age, I used the words like vagina, vulva, anus. It was really weird to have those words come out of my mouth because those were not things that we like talked about growing up either. But I just remembered she needed the words to be able to say it so she could protect herself and defend herself and advocate for herself. And so a lot of, as a writer, I've been told repeatedly when I would publish articles all the time, people would email me and say, you were able to put into words the things that I was feeling, but I didn't know how to express. And I feel whenever I read a book and something has expressed something that I've been trying to articulate in my own mind, it's so liberating. It's so freeing. Just like, oh my gosh, that's it. Or that you're not alone, that somebody else has also gone through it. I think those things are really important. And so a lot of my journey has been because I have this gift of being able to articulate things and to do it in writing. I do it in writing, and the ways that people reach out to me and thank me for the content, I know is like my way of being of service. And for my daughter, being able to give her the sentences and the sentence stems to say things to me helps encourage her self worth because then she has the ability and the language to do it. So I know for me, I grew up with the tiger parents who are not okay with feelings. And so my face becomes very stern sometimes when there's something that's displeasing to me. I'm one of those people who like, where's your emotions on your sleeve? So my daughter would say to me, I'm having feelings right now. You're making that face. Please don't make that face because it's like making things worse. So then I would tell her, you can say to me, I need more compassion right now, or I need this right now. And so she would use that with me and it would snap me out of that face and make me realize, oh, that's right. I'm dealing with a human being right here and she is advocating for herself. So let me remind myself about that. And it helped so much. So I think a lot of it is just the practice of, and even if you're not a writer, journaling, giving yourself some space and some room to articulate whatever it is. I just met a friend to go to the farmer's market, and she was saying she was trying to manifest these things. And I think a lot of times when we manifest, we want to manifest like the big goals, the big revenue markers, or the house, or the things. For her, she was like, is it silly if I just want to write like the small things? And I don't think so. I think if you give yourself permission to ask, that is one step closer to validating that you're worthy and that you are deserving. I would also say that culturally, I can see the difference because my partner is a white male, and the way that he moves through the world is very, very different from the way that I move through the world and even in our relationship. So I've had to tell him, for me to get to a place to even say out loud a desire or like, a request or whatever, I've already had to go through like multiple layers of, trying to like tell myself, no, harmony is more important, or like this is more important. And it's been a practice and it continues to be a practice. And sometimes you'll find people who are safe to do that with, and sometimes you won't. So, I just did a podcast interview where I said, allow yourself to interview the therapist because you have a right to find someone who's a good fit. Just because they have a credential behind their name doesn't mean that they're going to be the right fit for you. I had plenty of therapists who said terrible things that were not helpful to me during my healing journey. And so, similarly in life, we're going to find people who we practice this with. It's not going to work well. And then other people who we practice it with, and it's going to be great. Or, sometimes someone will even be able to like intuit or read or offer that for you. And if that opportunity comes up, I highly recommend, you dipping your toe in there and saying like, okay, let's try this out. It's going to be uncomfortable and vulnerable, but let's try it out.
You brought up something so interesting that I've never connected before in this way, or we haven't talked about on the podcast this way. And I'm also a writer, but just how when we have the self worth to put language to our emotions and our feelings, right? So the step is to identify them and then put language to it. That's when you actually start to create your life in a totally different way. And I always think of language as that powerful creator, but just the way
Mhm.
you link them, I feel like is just like, oh, like that's freedom, right? To be able
Yes.
to feel, not only feel, but put some words to feelings. And
Yes.
then once you learn to put the words to feelings, then you can actually now use that language to propel your life in a totally different way.
Yeah.
And
You
so
can have,
thank you for saying that, because that's such a
yeah. Like
powerful thing.
dialogue, conversation. I
Mhm.
think I would always say that the story that you tell yourself creates your reality. And that's usually like what we're saying in our minds and becomes our mindset. And the story that you tell others, like that becomes that shared reality that you're living in. And then if you can articulate even bigger of whatever it is that you're asking for from the universe, like that's where like so much more magic happens. But it takes so much practice. And I think it's why I love reading memoirs and really well written works where the language that's coming through is just a really distinct voice, because then I'm able to say, okay, so that person's voice is like that and that person's voice is like that. Well, how do I want to sound? And in the beginning, it could be some sort of like mimicry or, echoing kind of. And then you get to develop your own voice, which is really great.
I love reading for similar reasons. I like memoir, but I like lots of different things because I'm always fascinated by what comes out of people's brains. And then I'm
Mhm.
like, there's just like they created this whole world just from their mind, you know? And I'm sure I related to their life experience, but it's always so cool to me to sit back and be like, I just get to immerse myself in this person's brain for like the length of this book. And it's such
Mhm.
a pleasure. Like it's so much fun to do that.
So
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Well, then just going back to your self-worth journey then. So obviously you had a big healing journey in your 20s. What would you say then, where is there any kind of new turning point for you being able to have self-worth leverage it in your career? Because a lot of the women listening are corporate women. Some of them are like, oh, like I really want to get ahead in my corporate career. Some of them are wanting to leave. And
Mm-hmm.
that self-worth journey in there can be really intense, especially when you're trying to figure out, like, do I want to stay? Do I want to go? Is this worth it? What do I really want from my life? And could you share a little bit more about that from your perspective?
Yeah, so I was in corporate for a very long time, and then I started freelancing, and freelancing afforded me the opportunity to go into a lot of different environments and see. I think that for anybody who's worked in a company long enough, a lot of companies seem really put together on the outside, but then when you get on the inside, you're like, wait, what? How did this company get to this place and like get to these revenue markers? So I think once I started peeling back the curtains there and peeling back the curtains to myself, I was like, wait a minute. Now I'm getting clear about like what makes me happy, what doesn't make me happy. And thankfully, I was able to work as a consultant for like a year and a half, 2 years, and make enough money that I could take the next few years to go to intense therapy, become a yoga teacher, become a holistic practitioner. And those are things that I innately always wanted to do, but I didn't give myself the opportunity to do it because it didn't seem like that was on the tried and true career path. And when I found yoga as part of my return from living in China, I just remember like bringing my hands to my heart center and feeling like, oh my gosh, that feels very much like coming home. So then I started embarking on that. And it was really uncomfortable to have an eating disorder, to not feel comfortable in your body, to be in these positions and poses. But the breath, and I always would equate this because, you know, I'm very good at teaching beginners. And so people would come to my classes and I would just encourage them to understand that their breath is the opportunity to connect to the present moment. If you can bring all of your awareness to your inhalation, balanced by your exhalation, you automatically drop into this present moment. And in this moment, right here, right now, as you're listening to this podcast, in this moment, you're safe, which took me a long time to get to. There was a point in therapy when my therapist had said, all of those stories that you have that feel like they're going to catch up with you or that you're running away from or whatnot, as you're sitting here in this room right now, in this room, you're safe. So as I started to understand the power of the breath, which we all have, that it's autonomic, it's going to be automatic, you don't have to think about it, but you can also manipulate it and make it, lengthen, shorten it. That was a really wonderful kind of connection to that and movement, and really brought me into the present moment. So as I started to teach yoga, I started to see people's responses to my teaching, to me returning to the sense of innate ability and power. When I became a Reiki practitioner, I remember helping my grandmother, kind of like, hitting her back so that she would burp, and like massaging her. And those weren't anything that anybody taught me. But just from a very young age, I saw the power of touch and how healing it could be and how connective. So when I became a Reiki practitioner, I was like, oh, this also feels like this is a very natural extension. It's me coming home. And then when we had to practice on the other person in the room, the other person was like, you've done this before? I was like, no, we're at the same level of like beginning learning. And she's like, no, 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 because whatever it is that you're doing is different from what I'm doing. So I think starting to see that response and starting to see people feeling better from being around me, from taking a class with me, from me coming around and doing Reiki while they were in Shavasana, or just a gentle adjustment. Like I would never manipulate anybody's body because I didn't know their body story, but I would just maybe like gently place my hand to encourage them to bring their awareness to that part of their body. And just the amount of uh, like growth that the classes had, and just how transformative people were when they left the room. And so I was thinking, okay, so, what my family told me when I was younger was not true, because I'm returning to all these things that felt very natural to me that I really had always wanted to do. But they always told me like I wasn't valuable, I wasn't worthy, I, didn't know what I was talking about. Who would want to pay attention? I was basically made to feel like the worst person ever. And in fact, Brene Brown describes shame as, imagine that you're in a room with all the people who you know, who you think are your friends and your family and you love. Then you walk out of the room and you're within earshot distance and you can hear them all talking crap about you. And it's so bad to the point that you cannot even imagine ever being able to walk back into that room again. And I was like, that was literally my childhood. Actively my childhood. That wasn't like a analogy. Like that's what I experienced. And my family, they all knew what they were doing. They knew I could hear them, which like made it even worse. It was like their form of parenting. So I think once I started to see in my lived experience that this story that was unfolding was very different from the one that I was told, then I started realizing, like, wait a minute, I actually do add value to this situation and people do want to be around me. And it was a roundabout way to get to what I think I needed to understand and what I needed to learn, which I think is another valuable lesson, is that it's it never looks the way that you think it's going to look. Like, it just doesn't. You can do your best and have these visions, but like, I feel like the universe, you're doing a dance with the universe, and so there's opportunities that start to show up that can bring you to where you want to go in a more I don't know, enriching kind of way.
Mm. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I have a similar journey to you, and I really relate to it because I think there's a lot of, like when I became a yoga teacher, also that when you are seen, right? You're standing in front of the room and you become seen, and then you start to recognize that there is something to see, that
Mhm.
it's okay, not being like, oh, I should hide in the back. And for
Mhm.
me, like being kind of like the quiet Asian kid, it was always like,
Mhm.
oh, I was hid in the back. There's nothing to see here, and then to step in front and not be shamed, like you said, and not being like, she doesn't know what she's
Mhm.
doing, she doesn't know what she's talking about, which is what I was
Mhm.
always afraid would happen. And what actually happened is like, oh, that made me feel better.
Yeah.
And then it's such a light bulb, right? And it's always so interesting, I think, when any human gets to that point of recognizing and realizing, because that's to me what that self-worth piece is like, oh, there is something to see here,
Mhm.
and there's actually something good to see here. It's not just
Mhm.
like, if I get there, they're going to be like, something is wrong with this person. So I
Mhm.
loved what you said about that and shared about it, because I think it's a really important piece to understand, like self-worth is it's I like to think of self-worth as independent of what other people think, but other people can definitely help you get to that point
I
to
love that you
recognize
said
it.
that, because I was going to bring up, did you experience this in class too when you were teaching? That the expressions on people's faces made it seem like, ooh, are they not enjoying this? Like, they might not like really be liking this. But then at the end, they were like, oh my gosh, that was so great. And it was such a valuable lesson of, you never know what anybody's thinking. You never know what's going on in anybody's
You
head.
never know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't take it personally. And like, their praise is just as important as like any, constructive feedback or whatnot. But all of that, just that aren't like a just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna hold it loosely. It's not about like me necessarily, but we're all on our journey. So I just always found that so interesting, is wow, you never know. You just have no idea.
Well, it's like a two-part process, right? Because they can help you start to be seen and hold your self-worth. And then you have to hold your self-worth independent of their
Yes,
faces, or like the
yes,
person in the corner who's like not doing what you're saying at all. Because there's always those people. And if you're one of those people listening, hi, we always see
hi.
you. Like, but it's so true. And then you can hold who you are regardless of their experience. And I
Mhm,
think of that in coaching too all the
mhm,
time. Like, I'm like, I hold who I am, whether you have a good experience or not, or whatever is going on with you. And
mhm,
for us, it's like, it's so important to get to that really anchored space, but
mhm.
it is a whole process. It is a whole journey. And I think that, you and I just have had some similar
Yeah.
places where we've learned those lessons.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious for you too, like, where did that go from there? Like, once you got that grounding into your self-worth through that teaching practice,
Mhm.
and where has it allowed you to go from there?
I think it was a great foundation to taking the life that I want to build and continuing to cultivate it. So I'm working on a book right now about totally doing the opposite of what any good Chinese girl should do. I was like, I did the opposite of every rule and it wasn't intentional. Sometimes it was intentional. It wasn't always intentional. Um, but ultimately, what I've been able to see is, okay, well, I'm going to figure out what is important to me and cultivate a life rooted in that, because the things that are important to me are not going to be the same things that are important to everybody else. And I live in a very affluent neighborhood. So it's really easy to get caught up in the comparison game. Well, that person's driving that car and that person's living in that house and all this kind of stuff. I'm over here, divorced mom, renting this great spot down the street from my daughter's school, walking distance to the beach. But does it look like what I thought? And so there's always those old echoes of, you should buy multiple properties by now. You should have done this and done that. And then I think about time freedom being one of my probably the most important um, core value in business and being able to dictate my own schedule. Because if I don't and I have to be told I'm supposed to be somewhere, then it makes me feel caged in and blocked. And I don't think that serves anyone well. So, but creating your own time freedom comes with the other set of responsibilities and challenges and risks. You've got to be doing lead gen for your business. You've got to make sure that you're paying your team members, all of these other things. And so it's a trade off, but I would rather choose that hard than this hard of having to be in that space. And I think the other part is I'm a divorced mom. So already half my time with my daughter, she spent with her dad, and we don't have a great relationship. So I'm not talking to her every day when she's there. And, I don't know what she's doing when she's there for the most part. So I really try to honor the time that we have together. And especially because of the relationship I had with my parents, I want to make sure that I'm doing it differently and healing intergenerational trauma, which takes so much energy and effort. But because of that, and because that's the priority that I have, is being able to spend the time with her and make sure I create these opportunities that I think are meaningful and valuable and that she has expressed to me, then it also involves a different kind of hard. She has an extroverted personality. I'm very introverted. So for me to like rally myself to be able to be present for her is also a different game. But those are the things that I think the more that I understand my self-worth, then the more that I understand I get to define what makes me happy and what brings fulfillment. And I think happy is like overused, like happily ever after. I think, being at peace has become something that I'm very much treasure. Being content, uh, like those things I feel are so valuable, and being at peace doesn't sound sexy when you're younger. You're just like, okay, like, sure. But when you grow older, being at peace feels so good. You're like, I don't have this guilt and I don't have that. And so I think for any entrepreneur or anybody working a job where they want to get ahead, high achieving, then you have to advocate for yourself. You have to tout, what it is that you're good at and how you can be of service and how you can support others. And if you came from a community of color, you're probably not used to that, of like speaking up, because speaking up and being seen within the majority can feel really scary. So there are all these things that we are learning, but to even just give yourself the props of, hey, I'm trying, I'm doing, I'm every day. There's this practice my daughter's godmother sent to me, and I look in the mirror. This was already something that I had to do with my therapist. She's like, I want you to brush your teeth and like give yourself 25 positive attributes, which when I said this, people were like, 25? Like, that's a lot. So I've gotten used to it now, and I can do it like looking in my own eyes. But this next exercise was, you look at your own eyes and you say, I love you. And then the next thing is, how can I make you happy today? And being able to
Mm.
ask that question, even if I don't fully know the answer, has led to just a great feeling that I'm even allowing myself to ask that question.
You said so many important things. Like first the values of like what is it that you really value? Because I feel like sometimes when you're a high achiever, like you and I obviously both are, that you just go for something because you think you're supposed to. Like this is just the goal. You're just gonna gun for it and then you go all in super hard. It means you usually get it, but then you get there and you're just like, what was that for?
Mhm.
And so there's like that piece of it. So I love how you're like time, freedom, and fulfillment
Mhm.
and peace. And I always think about that too for myself, like in life and then in my entrepreneurial journey. Like
Mhm.
that's really what I'm going for, not just like big revenue numbers. And then the other piece, though, of what you're saying of, let me see, I want to catch what I had when you were talking. You had so many good things. Well, there was the values piece, and then there's the piece around um, just being able to be in your life in a way that's like not in
Mhm.
that comparison all the time. And I feel like that self-worth journey is again continuous. Oh, also what you were saying about being a person of color, like it can be really challenging for us to speak up. And then I think that's where the self-worth piece is so important, like knowing that you do have something to say. And sometimes people can force it. Like I feel like you can go into that super dominant, like constantly trying to get in word in all the time. And I'm like, you don't have to be like that either. You can
Mhm.
just be confident that when the moment comes and you can follow your intuition, you can just say what you need to say
Mhm.
and get in and out. That's what I'm always looking for. It's like, how can you be yourself fully and have that self worth to be yourself fully so that you can be yourself with work, in your relationships, dating, anything that you're going through, so that you can just feel like on the other side of it, you're like, I was me the whole time. Like that's always my goal. Like, was I Nicole? And then I love the question you ask about like, how can I make her happy today? Like, was I happy in how I executed today? Was I happy in what I gave? Was I happy in the places I held back because I needed more for myself today? Like those, I love the questions that you presented for us.
I love how you said the energy in which you show up in the room makes such a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the most powerful people are those who know how to harness their energy and how to have it emanate in a way that doesn't need to be forceful, pushing, that it's attraction based. But I've found that well, and also I think for people who don't really understand energy or just not into it, I would say we've all walked into a room before where you can feel the tension and you're like, something's off here, or something happened between these people or whatnot. That's energy. And so if you can palpably feel that, and that's just us being in whatever state we're being in, then if we can find that inner confidence and that ability to just be exactly who we are, exactly who we want to be, then that emanates so much more loudly than anything that we could say. And I think as a writer as well, I've interviewed thousands upon thousands of people. And then I've turned those interviews into stories and, published pieces and whatnot. And over and over again, I've heard from interviewees, that was the best interview that I've ever had, that I've ever done. Or when they read the piece, oh my gosh, that was the best piece that I've ever had written about me. How did you articulate that? So well, that's exactly what I wanted to say and whatnot. And I always say that it's because I can like feel what it is that they're trying to communicate to me. And so I'm less listening to the words that they're saying versus like what I can feel their heart actually wants to convey. And because of that, that's what I draw forward. That's what I like ask about. That's what I dive into. And then that's what I translate into the article. And I think when you allow yourself to tap into those nuances and the subtler levels, that can be so profound and it's widely underestimated. Like that rapport building and that ability to hold space for yourself and then hold space for someone else has led to the most remarkable connections that I've ever had. Like, I think sometimes it's funny if I ever thought about like looking through the names that are in my contacts list, that it would be pretty wild and that I know I could call those people and they would remember who I am based on the time that we shared. So, I think again, there's like many paths to get to where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so true. And I love that what you're saying, because I feel like once you're more tuned into who you are and your self worth, you actually then can tune in more to the
Mm-hmm.
energy of what's happening in the room and other people, because you're not worried about what they think of you. You're just like, well, I'm me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm here to see what's going on with all of you. And then you're like, oh, and then you get insights and things from being in that anchored space.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you gave us so many really great tips. I'm guess is there one for people who are really working on that self worth journey? Is there one practice or one tip you would give them to start working on today?
I would say that the thing that has most helped me over the last year has been grief journaling. And I think that for a lot of us, I know me in particular, I was never taught about how to handle any emotions, much less grief. And I think grief is one of those things culturally and societally also that we are not taught how to really handle well. And again, a lot of people don't have the words to articulate, just similar to like you I always tell people you don't know what it's like to be a parent until you become one, because I just don't think that there's any way to truly fully convey the reality that shifts. And similarly, I've had other people tell me you don't know what it's like to lose a parent until you've lost one, and what that like crevasse that opens no matter what your relationship was, just something happens and that shifts. So I think for grief, and especially for those of us who are raised in situations that maybe weren't healthy, that were toxic, that were abusive, or have been in relationships that were not the best or didn't unfold the way that we wanted them to, having the ability to do a grief journal, once I found that I process through that, through the stream of consciousness journaling, it opens up space for the things that I've already cultivated, that are already around me, the joy, the love, the relationships, to land deeper and to feel more worthy in receiving of the goodness, because I've stopped pushing away the good stuff for fear that this other stuff is actually true or like defines me somehow. So there's just this conflicting thing that's happening. And so with the grief journaling, the way that my therapist had told me is get a journal that represents the person or the relationship that you are grieving, just something that feels resonant with that. You set a timer and you start at like 10 minutes. And if you can, go to 15 or 20, and you do stream of consciousness journaling, like nonstop. Even if you're writing, I don't know what to write, I don't know why I'm doing this, like da 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 da. And eventually something will come through, and you just allow for it to come through. And the second that timer goes off, you stop whatever it is that you're doing, you get up and you move your body. You go get grounded, you like jump up and down, maybe like put a song on, start dancing, and just move it. And then that's it. And you don't have to think about it again. You don't have to but as much as possible to do it a few times a week and then see what happens. And I did not think that the effect would be as remarkable as it was. And even if it didn't make sense, even if I mean, I wasn't going back through and looking at those journals, and I didn't feel like every single time I was getting into something deep. But I think making space and carving out space for all of those potentially, shadow, negative, whatever it is that you just need to get out of you somehow does some magic and it's transformative. And then the good stuff, you allow it in more. And it's been great.
That's so incredible. I hope everyone takes her advice and does that. Like just getting into that journaling and really allowing your space for that. Well, Judy, it's been such a delight to have you on, and we like to end with rapid fire questions.
Yes.
So, are you ready?
Yes, I'm totally
Okay.
ready. So fun.
Okay. So, first one is, what is the last thing you watched on TV?
Oh, I was having a case of the Monday, so I put on a movie in the background with like Jamie Foxx, and it was about something about the jury and like Tommy Lee Jones. I'm not even sure about the name, but it was good. Also, to pick me up all the time, I tend to have like Modern Family just like on when I'm doing the dishes or like whatever, and I was like, the writing is so good and just like so heartwarming, and so I just have that on to make myself feel better.
I love that. Put it on in the background. Put some
Yeah.
Modern Family on. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Awesome. Next, so what is on your nightstand?
Right now, it's a hand drawn picture of myself and my daughter that her surf instructor drew for me as like a surprise gift because she had just graduated from college, asked if she could go with me to coffee to like pick my brain about becoming a graphic designer. And this was her thank you to me. And it is probably one of my most treasured gifts. Like, I remember the photo being taken, and she just saw it on my social media or whatnot and like chose that and drew it. And it was so unexpected and remarkable to me. So I love that.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love
Yeah.
that. That sounds so beautiful. Okay, well, when was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
Ooh, I signed up with a personal trainer, and he is the owner of this boxing studio that my friend invited me to go to. And one day after class, he's like, I want to work with you. I was like, all right. He's like, just come with me and like, just like, I'll do a private, like a free private session with you. I was like, okay. So we were doing it, and I was nervous about the investment because it's not a cheap investment, but the effects have been profound in so many other areas of my life. And I think partly it's saying I'm worth it to invest this much money. I'm worth it because I want to see how strong I can become. It's always been a goal of mine to just be curious and see. I'm worth it to have someone have his undivided attention on me for that hour and encourage me and tell me how strong I am. And I think him just continually reiterating to me, you are so strong. Like, you just don't know that you are so strong. And I think for a lot of us, we just are in go mode all the time. And in order to, I think, achieve in society as a woman and a woman of color, you just have to have like blinders on at times and just go and just there is no like stopping to be like, you know what, I'm pretty good at this, and like or whatnot, and like encouraging yourself because it's like, okay, like there's just so many other things and micro and macro that you have to deal with. And so having him say that to me as like a not even just an affirmation or a reminder, but almost like a reality check to be like, I don't know if you know this about yourself, but this is how strong you are. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I think that has been so rewarding, just to take a pause and realize that in so many other facets of my life, I've been so much stronger than I've given myself credit for.
I love that parallel with the physical, but I will say too, having done some boxing, that is incredibly physically challenging. So kudos to you for doing that because that is a lot. Amazing. Okay, our last question is, what are your top 3 most used emojis on your phone?
Oh, well, it's probably the face. Always a little bit like at my growing edge, and like,
Mhm.
I'm also a huge klutz. Like, me and my daughter, we are so klutzy, and it has become like a running joke with some of our close friends. They like watch us and they're like, "Oh God," like the both of you. So there's that. There's probably like a heart to, like, I like to, as much as possible, spread the love and encourage. Um, and the last one, I'm not sure. I feel like I do a lot of the response emojis of like the exclamation point, the heart, and the haha. I'm always
Mm.
looking for a good haha.
Yes, I know. I love a good haha too, in general.
Yeah.
Well, Judy, what a joy to have you on in such a deep and wide ranging conversation. And what is the best way for people to find out more about you and what you do?
Thank you. So right now, the website is Wild Hearted Words. If you wanted any business and marketing and branding elements, that we are actually rebranding, which I'm very excited about. And my designer is wonderful, and he always kind of like surprises me. So I'm not even sure what we're gonna end up with, but I'm really excited about it. And then just my name on Instagram and LinkedIn, Judy Tsuei. And I'm definitely posting there a lot on Instagram, kind of the elements of the personal life and parenting and divorced parenting and whatnot. And on LinkedIn, a lot of things about content marketing, brand story, and just mindset stuff for women entrepreneurs. I actually just posted something, said, I'm not a football person, but my partner, he was like, hey, have you seen this photo of Brady when he was recruited for the NFL? And he was like number 199 out of like in the sixth draft like pick. He was like not, and his photo is, he's not muscular, like, or whatnot.
Mhm.
And now he's the GOAT, like the greatest of all times, like quarterback. And he said there are no shortcuts. You don't
Mm.
have to be special. It's just about perseverance and dedication and hard work. And, if like just being able to see that image and then to see who he's become, I think if anybody wants any inspiration, that like photo, when you just see it, is so powerful. And I loved, well, there was that. And then recently I posted this one about Post Malone, because it was like his first song or whatever video that he did. And they're like, if Post Malone can start here and get to where he is, you can do anything.
That's awesome. Well, we'll also link all of those in the show notes, everyone. And then again, Judy, what a fun conversation. Thank you so much for being on the School of Self Worth. I
Thank
am
you.
so grateful you've been here sharing with all of us.
I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for what you're doing.